All right. Looks like folks are still coming on in, so we'll let them come in. I just wanted to, I'm Anna from Shadow Ventures, everyone. Thank you for joining today. We have an awesome roundtable on the metaverse today that I'm personally super excited about. Thank you to Carabiner, our sponsors, and Andy for coordinating everything and getting this off the ground. So it looks like folks are still trickling in, so we'll give it a minute, but I just want to welcome everyone, and I will hand it off to Andy from Carabiner Communications to take it away.
Manav, thank you so much. This is an exciting time. I am really looking forward to the next 60 minutes. So Manav and Ian from Shadow Ventures, thank you both. Ian, unfortunately, couldn't be here today, but thanks to him. Peter and Suzanne with Carabiner Communications, my partners over there, instrumental in making sure that we get this put together today. Both Carabiner and Applied Solutions, where Christopher is from, help sponsor today's event. So thank you both, Carabiner and Applied Solutions, for making sure that we can get our great panelists together. So my name is Andy Hagedon. I'm one of the affiliate connectors at Carabiner. I help do a lot of writing, branding, those sorts of things in our marketing communications department. Asked for an opportunity, or I was asked to bring in a handful of people to talk about what might be eventually possible with the metaverse. The metaverse has gotten a lot of discussion since particularly Facebook changed their name last fall. But what I want to do today is talk really about, set these goals. I want to talk about what is possible with the metaverse. I want us to radically think about what we've never done before. There are a lot of things that we're currently doing in the metaverse now. We will need to define kind of where we are, but then we also want to look forward and see, all right, well, how do we change ourselves? How do we think differently so that we can really make some innovations and do something different? Now we're here with Shadow Ventures, and we have a lot of the built industry with us. So we're going to look at how the metaverse and the built industry are going to come together. And they've already done that quite a bit, as a matter of fact. So we'll cover a little bit of that. So we're going to talk about where are we now? We're going to talk, where are we headed in the next 5 to 10 years? And then we're going to open it up for questions. All right. And believe me, this 60 minutes is going to go fast. So we're not going to take a lot of time. We're going to go through really quick and get started. First, I want to introduce our panelists. I've got Jen Regan. She's the Chief Operations Officer and co-founder. She at Morpheus XR. She's been leading change management and entertainment and culture for more than 18 years. And now she's bringing culture into the metaverse. I have Dr. Nima Sashar. He's the Chief Technical Officer, the CTO of Visual Computing and Artificial Intelligence at Nextech AR Solutions. Dr. Sashar previously founded 3D.ai, which he sold to Nextech AR, and has worked for Intuit, Apple, and taught university-level software engineering. We also have Christopher Riddell. He is the Director of Innovation at Applied Software. He's also the podcast host of the AEC Disruptors, with an undergrad degree in architecture and a master's in building construction and facility management from Georgia Tech. Finally, we have Jason Pfeiffer. He is the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, a podcast host for Build for Tomorrow, and also author of a brand new book of the same title, Build for Tomorrow, an action plan for embracing change, adapting fast, and future-proofing your career. I could not ask for a better group of panelists. I am definitely not the smartest guy in this room. So lucky for me, I just get to ask the questions, and I'm going to do as little talking as possible, but I'm going to set some guide rails and just try to get us along the lines. Again, in the next 60 minutes, hopefully we'll come away with some really cool ideas and help spur innovation amongst all the people who are out there listening to us. So let's get started with this. First, we need to set kind of an idea of what the metaverse is. It's what I've heard called a fuzzy concept, right? I believe that completely because a lot of different definitions are out there. Jen, I want to start with you. Can you give me your definition of what the metaverse is?
Yes, and I was raised on science fiction, and I was raised in the fantasy world. My watch profile is very expansive, and so I was raised in which a metaverse is a collection of universes. It's the most masterful term you can use to describe a collection of universes. And for me, what that looks like right now is we're in a landscape of people developing, what was before called apps, which are now entire metaverses. So I'm at a company who's building its own metaverse, which is a collection of universes. And I will just plant my flag and say it's frustrating when companies try to name themselves a big name that tries to kind of take the whole space. Because the truth is, metaverse to me was a beautiful word that could be used in the most expansive form. That's how I would define it. I don't know if anyone would counter or add to that.
Yeah. So of the other three of you, does somebody have a distinct different opinion on that?
No, I mean, I agree. As someone who hasn't delved too deep into the metaverse outside of what we've heard and a little bit of what we read, one of the most simplest definitions that I really appreciated in what we see coming is this idea of a 3D evolution of the internet, and how it builds on, just like Jen said, this idea of multi versions of that. But I like that it was simple, right? Because there's a lot that goes into it and a lot of technology, but just this 3D evolution of the internet was something that maybe you could wrap your head around.
Sure. Jason, what do you think? Are those on target?
Those sound good to me. I have a philosophy about innovation, which is that I think that innovators need to do a better job always of building what I call a bridge of familiarity. I think a challenge that people have when they're in an innovative space, when they're building something that's really advanced, is that they are very aware of its value. They have immersed themselves in the project, and so they believe in it. They understand the purpose of it. They understand why people should love it. But people outside of that may not understand that. And I think that often innovators do a bad job of recognizing that they have to not just build something great, but then build the bridge across the gap between what they're building and where everybody is. And the challenge that I think the metaverse has right now is that it hasn't really done a good job of building that bridge. I think a lot of people outside the conversations about the metaverse do not understand what people are talking about. And that's in part because they don't understand what the value is, right? The definitions that Jen and Christopher just gave are really good, but they also leave out, right? Not fault of yours, but really just a fault of where we are in the moment of this conversation, leave out some really fundamental questions like, what do I do with it? How do I build my brand with it? Right? My belief is that people don't like new things. What they like are better versions of old things. They like you to come and say, this thing that you're familiar with, we can do it better and more innovative, and we can grow as a result. And right now, I feel like the metaverse is stuck in it's a new thing, but we haven't exactly explained how it's a better version of something that people are already familiar with. So I think it's important to start defining.
You're telling me I can't watch Ready Player One and just have an immediate understanding of what we're talking about.
Well,
right?
maybe it's a starting point at least.
Well, what's scary is those are always built off worlds that are super broken.
Right.
And so like
very
when you look back at movies or you read books and you hear metaverse, I mean, Ready Player One, no one wanted to live in that world. So they wanted to escape from reality. And so how do we eliminate that way of thinking?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give a definition that I read recently. So Matthew Ball, after going through Snow Crash, Neil Stephenson's book back in 1992, defined or kind of coined the term metaverse. Matthew Ball then wrote this, I believe: metaverse is an always-on virtual world that seamlessly blends with the real flesh and blood world, courtesy of augmented reality and virtual reality and mixed reality. Nima, do you think that's accurate? How does Next Tech AR approach the metaverse as a definition?
No, I mean, I think I like Christopher's definition. That's how I view it, and that's how I pitch it. Why people should care. It's like the world is 3D in most ways that we've been kind of plugged into it digitally is basically 2D. You and I are still in a 2D. The phone is 2D and whatnot. But bottom line, the world is not 2D, right? So how do we kind of step out of that and literally go to a new dimension, for lack of better word? That's how I pitch it. I mean, we're mostly in e-commerce, not exactly e-commerce, but commerce and commercial goods and whatnot. Just like think about it, we've been shopping the same way for 20 years. But now there's this ability to step out, experience things. So that's how I look at it. I mean, it's just extension of internet into the 3D.
Yeah. Well, Jason, thanks for bringing up that idea of bridge of familiarity and crossing the chasm between what's possible and what we might need or what we're familiar with now. So one of my questions is, when working with clients, and we can relate this back to the built industry if we want, how do you get clients to make that gap, to understand what's possible. Okay, I've done it this way for 20 years. Why should I change now? Jen, you've been really good at this change management and that sort of transition. How would you do that? How do you get your clients to think beyond what they've done?
Well, and Jason, I had a quick chance to connect before we started, and this bridging people along a journey. There's a little museum art gallery in LA, if you've ever been, the Museum of Jurassic Technology, and they have this quote at the beginning of it. If you haven't gone, check it out. That's about leading people down a path of flowers. And in order to get them to where you want them to go, you have to give them something sweet smelling and familiar and kind and take them on a journey. And for us, entering the metaverse and we're defining metaverse and Web3 and VR and AR. I mean, there's so many terminologies in this grand new landscape. For us, it is, what we're focused on is how to capture in-person, three-dimensional value experiences. What is missing from being home, working remotely since 2013 and not being able to meet in person for 2 years? What was missing from my life that I had? I've had a VR headset for 2-3 years. I've had games, I've had things, but what was missing? And what was missing was some of the aspects of, we have a theology. What was missing was some physicality, from social bonding, some, the way I which the presence of beings and objects in 3 dimensions to me, how it made me feel, the emotional quality of my experience. That's what was missing for me. So looking at what we're trying to offer, we're trying to get people back to things that are familiar. So we're starting right with culture building, trainings, webinars, seminars, things that were best in person. There's a lot of value to Zoom, but there's just something about being in a room where you can pay attention and stand where you want to, and you can choose where you engage and who you have side talk with, and then pull away from the group and come back. There's a lot of agency that we've been losing as individuals participating in group experiences when we're stuck in 2 dimensions. But when you have 3 dimensions, we get our agency back, we get freedom back, and we get play back, and we have the ability to start to connect with the content or connect with each other more organically in a way that we can't in Zoom, right? No one else can talk while I'm talking unless you cut me off rudely, which is unfortunate. And so
that would be really rude, wouldn't it, Jen?
It would be very rude. But with that said, so how do I help people get there? Is we are targeting experiences that we think people crave the most while they're working remotely, and B, we're putting them in familiar scenarios. So we're doing diversity and inclusion trainings in virtual reality, not because we're trying to put people in someone's avatar to walk a day in the life. That's a great application, because we want people to be in a room together, to physically feel each other's presence and engage with each other in meaningful dialogue in a way that's a little harder and less organic in 2 dimensions.
And then Christopher, do you think there's a good application for that in the way you guys have been using technology in your AEC industry for a while? I mean, is there an innovation there that you see coming down the road?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I appreciate this idea of, what have we missed in sort of this 2D remote world? I mean, because I think I haven't been to my office in a couple of years, and we're doing a get together tomorrow, and like my stomach hurts because I have to like learn how to interact again and be around people that, so I appreciate that. In our space, where we see it a lot for AEC currently is, we're stuck on this idea of just how do we maybe use it for meetings to be a little more efficient so we can see inside the virtual environment of a project. But what we don't see a lot, and I think like a company like Applied Software, say a consultant, can help is even, how do we run interactive workshops and how do we conduct training as part of what's in our industry in that virtual environment. We're meeting with customers and they're like, hey, we want to take everyone off site because when we're doing it remote like this, we don't know how much engagement they're getting, so why not take that training into the metaverse so that we actually have a little bit more of that physicality and we actually can have that over the shoulder in terms of training. So that's where I see at least where we come to play. And then just the industry as a whole, AEC, it's an industry that struggles in terms of technology adoption. It struggles with productivity. So, the opportunities are advanced. But what we find is there's so many sort of bespoke workflows that exist that where we're struggling is kind of pulling everyone together and agreeing on a common way of doing it. So I think all that to be said, I think getting that common familiarity of building that bridge that Jason talked about is super critical in our industry, because in our industry, again, we have everyone's a silo. no matter what we have, everyone's a silo, and getting them to work together has proved to be a struggle.
Yeah, you know, I was fortunate enough to find in some of my research leading up to this an article by Zach Mortis in Redshift, and I don't have the link for it, but I could potentially find it here for us. They talked. He did a very good job. The article is actually fairly old. It was written maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I think it's been updated, but it has a lot of really good information about how the metaverse and AR, VR are currently used in the built industry. Things to drive efficiency by, you know, on-site location using of AR and virtual reality to walk people through a building. One of the things he pointed out was you can use AR and VR to see what's underneath the ground. And that's awesome. That's a perfect way.
It's like X-ray.
Yeah, exactly right. But I can see, you know, through VR goggles or through a cell phone, what's laying underneath the ground. And that's in use today. And I love that. I think that's a very powerful use of AR and VR technology. My question there is what, and maybe Nima or Jason, you guys can offer some advice there. What are those roadblocks? One of the things that I think I heard mentioned was that, you know, when you're out on a construction site, having reliable internet access it can be a big deal. You know, everything that we're using is all wireless, and are there applications or ways to get around that? So Nima, I'll start with you. What do you think the biggest roadblocks might be in the technology to do that sort of on-site VR and AR? You are still on mute. Let's see if I can unmute you. Yep.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no, we're really pretty much into the mixed reality side of things, being able to map a space and place virtual objects there that could be accessed as a shared AR experience, whether that's kind of signs and whatnot. There's an app that does that. But I would say there's two major, I mean, internet and connectivity is one, but the form factor, obviously, it kind of makes it more limited to things that are transient and not always on, right? Because with a phone, you could pull up the phone and pick up the information and do what you want, but that's not something you want to basically keep holding for an hour unless you have the HoloLens or whatever. So I think that's one. And then, you know, it's kind of interesting. And I lived in Silicon Valley a long time, and one irony is that you take the train that kind of goes around the 101 corridor, and as you pass Google, all internet is gone. So there's trillions of dollars of companies there and no Wi-Fi access. So we got that problem too. But I would say form factor after that.
I think safety continues to be an issue, especially on job sites. You know, when we think about this idea of, you know, if I have, say, VR goggles, even if it's an augmented mixed reality where I can still see my surroundings, I mean, there's a lot on a job site that is dangerous. And so I think that's something we have to always be thinking about when we're designing even the hardware, is how do we design it in a way where it doesn't become a distraction from what can be a potential dangerous situation.
Yeah, but not only that, I mean, it has a potential of helping save lives too. You know, having VR in a headset can give you virtual barriers or warnings. Say I'm starting to get too close to an electrical line, or, you know, an edge, right? If I'm, you know, 9 stories up or something, I could have VR goggles and get visual warnings or something that let me know that, hey, I need to back off 5 feet or something. So I think there's some safety value there as well.
And we're seeing it not necessarily with VR, AR, but with like machine learning and AI, where they're detecting those safety issues and alerting people of, hey, you know, so-and-so is on a ladder without, you know, proper harnesses or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and certainly what Next Tech AR has done, they have done certain things in big cities like City of London and in museums and developing these spaces so that you've got that mixed reality and you've got different cues, visual and auditory cues that come in at you. That's something I think very similar. You could build in kind of that localized metaverse, if you will, to have that immersive experience and get those kind of inputs and intel from different things around you. So that's really interesting.
So one of the
I just want to remember, one second, just want to remember, use the chat. If you don't see it down below, if you see a chat button, go ahead and open up the chat, folks, and please feel free to start dropping questions in here. I want to make this as interactive as possible. If you just see a more button, you can find the chat underneath that. Go ahead, Jen.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Yeah. And I see Jualant. If I said your name wrong, I apologize. Please, please, please correct me. I actually think I'm going to answer your comment a little bit, asking us to talk about consumer engagement with the product and how that might change. So when we talk about roadblocks, one of the things that Morpheus XR has chosen to do is we are focusing on culture builders. So those that are facilitators and doing live interactive experiences, and enterprise teams, organizations who hire those groups and host and convene people in distributed groups. So even though we focus on the enterprise use case, we are directly dealing with consumers because we've onboarded at this point 1,000 professionals into headsets, into VR in the last year. And so we're getting to see and interact with what the end user who is least familiar with is experiencing. And these, we've been taking note, we're taking as many notes as possible, our onboarders, and trying to observe what are the roadblocks we're hitting. Absolutely visual fidelity and its correlation to nausea is huge. If you have great visual fidelity, you have lower nausea. If you have lower visual fidelity, which gives you more functionality, you have greater nausea. There's things like that we're learning that we can share offline in a Geek Fest. But the nausea and the physical comfort of hardware, the inclusion of hardware, if you have any hand disabilities or sight disabilities, there's an inclusion concern around headsets. So for us, what you're seeing, a lot of the biggest names in Metaverse right now are actually 2D Metaverses. Sandbox and Decentraland and all these things, they sold all this virtual real estate. They're 2D Metaverses on a website. So a lot of the exciting Ready Player One stuff isn't even happening there yet. It's just two-dimensional. And what I love about two-dimensional, we provide a desktop and mobile version, is it's inclusive and everyone can participate, but you're not getting the full value of the immersive qualities without a headset. So a roadblock itself is the hardware, and getting to a place where like the HoloLens or glasses, where headsets truly glasses, like I always have a headset on my desk. This is not it's so much better than it's been, but it's not the easiest tool. And so as far as how the consumer product, the Quest 2 or Meta 2 has revolutionized the consumer VR experience. The hundreds of thousands of people who bought this since 2020, the meetups in VR, I've gone to a Roots concert and some other concerts in VR. Those experiences from a consumer perspective are so gratifying that I think they bring people who aren't gamers and who are outside of the historical target demographic, which is great. But when I'm dealing with professionals, if you tell them, hey, for fun or for your training, I want you to put on this hardware, I'm meeting a lot of resistance. I have to really help people get comfortable. We're doing a lot of like basic onboardings to get people comfortable with the technology. It's kind of intimidating. So I'd say that's a decent roadblock. And until it's as simple as your glasses, I think we're going to see, we're going to have this early adopter crew, but how can we be inclusive to everyone with glasses this heavy? I don't think so.
Yeah,
You need
Jason,
like a film on your screen that projects so you don't have to put glasses on.
Right.
That's right. Jason, I think you've probably got a really good perspective coming from the media at Entrepreneur Magazine and hearing from all the different companies out there that are trying to expand into this space. What do you think the technology is like, and how does that relate to the fatigue that Jen was mentioning now compared to what you see and what you hear about coming in the next 12, 24, 36 months?
Yeah. So first of all, I just have to say that I've really loved this conversation so far, because a thing that I am seeing threading throughout everything that all of you are talking about, and I will sort of very overtly separate myself from all of you in that you all know what you're talking about, and I'm just an observer. But I love how focused everybody is on pain points, and starting from the problem, I think, is really critical. I think back to the very first time that I ever put a sort of version of VR glasses on my head, and I was in the NBA's headquarters, National Basketball Association's headquarters in New York, and they were just testing this thing out, and they hadn't put it out into the world yet. And they allowed me to, I put them on, and suddenly I was transported to courtside, mid-court of, like 5 minutes of a game that they had filmed. And it was a Miami Heat game, which was exciting because I'm a Miami Heat fan. But I have to tell you that after the novelty of it wore off, I started to think, this actually sucks. And the reason why it sucks is because it is a fixed experience, right? Which is to say that I am at center court, which means that the action is never actually in front of me, right? If you think about center court, the action is over here or it's over here. It's never in front of you. And I would love to be center court at a real game, because then I'm getting the experience of being there in the crowd, but I'm missing that here. And so you're giving me the best version of the thing that I would get in person without the thing that's valuable in person. And I'm missing the best version of what it is to be watching it at home with the multiple camera angles and always keeping me close to the action. I'm far away from the action and I'm not enjoying the crowd. And I thought, this is cool, but it's not there yet, because this is interesting technology that's been applied to an experience. And I'm sure that there's value to it. But right now, you're leading the conversation with, let's play with the technology, rather than leading the conversation with, what's the pain point for the consumer? Where can the fan experience be actually enhanced? And now I think that we're past some of those first years of just like, isn't this cool? Let's just try it with lots of things. And I think we're now having more nitty-gritty conversations about, let's start with pain points for consumers and users and then build from there. And that's what I'm really excited about. And so I think that right now, the consumers who I'm speaking to, the average everyday entrepreneur, they're watching this space and they're interested in it, and they want to know, how can they utilize it to build better relationships with their consumers or to create more engaging products, whatever the case is. But I think that they haven't exactly seen how that's going to work yet. And part of that is because we haven't yet worked through some of the big barriers, like Jen was just saying. Those glasses are, I have a pair of those at home on my desk too, and they're big and they're clunky. My wife refuses to put them on because it makes her nauseous, and it's just not there yet, but it's very, very interesting. And I'm glad that now that we have technology that's being improved to the point of kind of more mass usability, we can start to say, all right, let's now start with where people are having a gap in their experience, and we can build from there.
I'd be curious if I could ask Jason.
Yeah.
If, so they replicated something you could do in real life, and it kind of fell short. But what if that game was one-on-one, like LeBron versus MJ in their prime? Would that have felt different, because then you're experiencing something that you could never have experienced elsewhere?
That's interesting. So in that scenario, it would have been a kind of, it would be an animation, right? Somebody would have created the two characters. So maybe, the challenge that I think you have with sports and VR is that if you're a spectator of sports, it is a fairly 2D experience, right? Playing sports is a 3D experience. Watching sports is a 2D experience. And even if you created the most realistic version of Jordan and LeBron in their prime playing against each other, creating it in a VR, I don't think is really all that different than creating it in 2D, because both times I'm still separated from the action. Where I think you could have a lot of value in fusing at least AR with sports is that I think that real sports consumers always want more information. They love statistics. They love to know how something that just happened relates to something else. And I think to be able to, and you get a little bit of that on television, but I think to be able to have more control of that in your own environment, I think TNT has done something super interesting, again, in a 2D space, where you can watch a TNT game and you can control which cameras you'd like to see. So you can see the live feed, but also if you want to watch the camera that just follows LeBron throughout the whole game, so you can just see him on defense when nobody cares, you can do that. Now, I think the more control you could have of that, and then be able to immerse yourself in it and have stats and whatever pop up around you, I think that would be really cool. But again, it has to start from the perspective of like, what can a consumer get that they couldn't get just by watching? And I think that whether you're experiencing in 3D or 2D, you're still just watching.
So let me bring us back to the question before about the technology and advancements in particularly like the eye hardware and how we physically interact with this new metaverse. Jason, what have you heard about what might be coming down the pipe? I know Apple's bringing out a new device. They're talking about it being delayed, not coming out this year, maybe not even in 2023. What do you hear and what do you think is going to happen in the next couple of years?
Yeah, well, so I should clarify that I don't cover tech specifically. So I'm not your guy for that. But what I will tell you that I'm hearing a lot of, and what's getting pitched to me, and I'm starting to have conversations with people who are engaging with sort of general Web3 technologies as a means of building community. I think I'm seeing a lot of companies who basically have translated all of this crazy technology down to, this can help me build community. And I like that. I like that a lot, because that's a business fundamental, right? If we want to start with pain points and we want to start with fundamentals, then building community and engaging your consumers is a really good place to start. And I love that. I don't love that a lot of the Web3 companies are, I think they're overreaching right now. They're telling me what this technology is going to do before it's actually done it. And I think that creates confusion, and I don't love it. But I do like that we've got an industry that experimentation is at its core and community is at its core. And I think that is a really good place to start.
Sure. The other thing that I've noticed too, and this has just happened within the last 3 or 4 years, is the democratization of this AR and VR. And Nextech has been like a leader, a pioneer in that regard for kind of the commercialization and consumerization, if you will, of 3D modeling. In the built industry, within the last few years, the movement has been from these deep-pocketed architecture firms were the only ones who could invest in the very technical game engine-driven 3D modeling to show their clients, blow up views and walk through views of new buildings, et cetera. But that's changed. I understand that it's becoming less and less expensive and easier to develop. Nima, do you want to talk about how the advances in technology are allowing more and more people, everyday people like even myself, to create virtual models, holograms, those sorts of things? And we'll see if I can unmute you here.
Yeah,
there
sorry.
you go.
Yeah, I mean, we take that internet analogy to its logical conclusion. I mean, internet is useful because it's easy to create content. I mean, that's what the new internet is, or Web 2.0 for you. So, but that we don't have necessarily just yet on the 3D side of it. I mean, what we've started is we've made it easy, like we've created tools so that little by little people could actually create 3D assets and experiences themselves. So initially, and still to a large extent for commercial businesses, we make 3D assets of digital twins of their products. I'm not talking about billboards necessarily, but mostly commercial. We're doing it for them. But literally every month we're rolling out tools so that they could do it themselves. It's good business for us, but also it's the only true way that you could kind of bring 1 billion products into this whole 3D/metaverse world. I mean, that's the only way for this to really kick on. Obviously, a lot of that is happening on the VR side. You can make your own world inside a platform, etc. But we're really fundamentally talking about things that do exist in the real world, and we want to replicate them and just kind of turn them into 3D. And that's where we're really, most of my days are spent trying to figure that out. Yeah.
Yeah, which is another interesting segue. You're taking existing objects. One of the great things about what this metaverse develops for us is something that's completely unreal. So getting back to that original goal of helping us expand our thinking into trying to innovate, and I'm not talking about Absolute Vodka creating some hokey Coachella event, and where you could go to a night or a dance club, if you will, in Decentraland or the Sandbox, one of the two, and dance on a pole, or drink a virtual martini. So there's some branding ideas out there where they're trying to get in front of these early adopters in these new virtual realities. But what else? How can we expand and spend time daydreaming to expand what we're thinking about so that we can come up with real functional, valuable ways of using the metaverse? Jen, in your change management, and go ahead, Jason, you want to take that?
Well, I was sorry, Jen, if you don't, I was just going to tell a quick story from the past that I thought sets the conversation for the future up really nicely. It's just a tale that I really love. So in the late 1800s, when the car, very early automobile, was introduced, people hated it. They called it the devil wagon. When you would drive a car down the street, people would yell, "Get a horse!" at you, and they would throw rocks at you, and the story, as it's generally been told here, is that the person who ultimately brought the car to the masses is Henry Ford because of the way that he revolutionized manufacturing. But I talked to this woman who'd spent a very long time researching this, historian for a book, and she said, Henry Ford actually was the beneficiary of a change that had happened before him. And that was that the auto manufacturers had looked around and saw that people were not really interested in this car thing. And they were trying to figure out why. And then they realized it was because they were advertising the car as a replacement to your horse. They would say, get rid of your horse and buy this car, for all sorts of reasons that were very obvious to the people who were making cars. But, the thing is, people liked their horses. The horse was a member of the family. And so they were actually pretty resentful when you told them to get rid of their horse, which they had, and their father had, and their grandfather had, and their grandfather. And so instead, they shifted the advertising to stop talking about a car as a replacement for a horse, and instead talk about it as a better horse. And they started to adopt the language of horses into cars. It's the reason why we have cars that are named after horses, like Mustang. And it's the reason why words like horsepower became popular. And for a while in the very beginning, they would even have like gas tanks that were shaped like horses. And anyway, the point of this is that ultimately was the thing that got people to say, aha, now I understand how this fits into my life. And so as we talk about the future and how we have this great new technology and there are all sorts of things that it can do, I think I just want to caution again that I think we really need to start from the place of where is the consumer and where are their needs and where do they actually want their experience to be enhanced, rather than saying, hey, this thing that you've already been doing, throw it in the garbage. I've got a better way to do it, because that's just never going to bring people along. So even as we like pie in the sky it, and I think that stuff is interesting, I'm always more interested in like, what are the tangible things that we can build off of the things that people need right now using the technology that we're developing for tomorrow.
Great way to put it. Great way to put it. Jen, in your experience and what you've done and working, I mean, you're using this every day. You've been into it now for at least a few years, making that transition and the projects that you told me about earlier. So where do you see this going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I absolutely love Jason's orientation there. And that's exactly what I think we did, right? We, me and my co-founders, we all met up at virtual Burning Man, and we were having such a power, it's like you could laugh at it. We were having such a powerfully transformative experience in our headsets, one of us in New York, one in Miami at the time, and one LA. And we were like, wow, this is sure bringing us joy. I was living alone during COVID, and I was isolating because I was very afraid. I had anxiety, and I didn't feel alone for the first time in 9 months. And I remember that feeling was so powerful. I was like, this could be a solution, but what are the problems we're solving? And so we've been very clear with Morpheus XR, we are going to solve a culture problem for distributed and remote teams. Like, we all were overly relying on meeting in person to keep connection alive. And what would it be like if you don't have to budget for flying someone, or if they get the hotel budget and you can include everyone in your company and not just include only your managers? And how would a company culture change if more people were included in these culture, conferences and meeting opportunities? So we went down that path. We said, what's a problem that if we can solve it will bring joy and meaning to people? And so that's what we went for. And what I can tell you, because we're talking about the built environment, what we've done is basically, instead of having each company have to create their own app, we are creating a metaverse that lets everyone have their own universe within it, right? So instead of having to create your own app, we're using Unity, and you can import your own worlds, you can do your digital twins, and we're basically, think of us like a domain host for your metaverse, but specifically we've built all around engagement and interaction, and the specific social bonding tools. Like if you put your hands in, something happens that's very rewarding. You can come try a demo of our app and we'll show you. You can cheers alcohol in a way that, yes, you'll never be able to drink alcohol virtually, but you feel the satisfaction of clinking glasses in a way that confirms that you made contact with someone. Those kind of reinforced behaviors of social connection. So we've built that specifically for people to use the way they want to. But what I'll bring this up is that in the built environment, what's exciting are people who architects, designers who can't get the funding for these amazing, outlandish, beautiful buildings, who can now create them in virtual reality. And so you can actually enhance or build upon, oh, hello, welcome. It's always important. This is the value of remote work. But dinosaurs, actually, this is a very good point, which is being able to have dinosaurs. If you guys haven't seen the movie Free Guy yet, the utopia that they built.
It's hilarious.
It's awesome.
Is exactly what's possible. And that's my answer to this question, which is a place where people can have dinosaurs and waterfalls and also incredible architecture. And the number one thing we're finding is people want to see realistic things. I'm experiencing people are more satisfied with that fantastical realism than they are with the completely outlandish, completely out of this world. And I think we're craving that magic. And I'll pause there and let others jump in. I'm sure you have.
Well, that's
others.
great. I'll expand on that just a little bit and just bring that around. I like this idea of these shared experiences, but that works back to physical work as well. Yes, there's a social aspect where we feel like we're connected, more connected in those realities. But if we're working on a project together and we can be in the same space together, looking at the same project together, spinning it, moving it, looking in between floors, or checking out different materials, and you've got not just the people who are in your physical room, but in the virtual room with you, and that can be expanded obviously across geographies and time zones, that's a more powerful subset. It's a more powerful set of mind power that you're putting into a project. So I think it's both powerfully socially and for the business goals of today's modern development. And that goes beyond just the built industry. It doesn't matter what you're working on. If you're an advertising agency and you're going through creative and you're able to connect with people in a more concrete, if you will, way, I think that's helpful. So Christopher, you're probably closest of all of us to the built industry in what you do with Applied Solutions. Tell me, how will you leave today and take these ideas back to your company and try to expand on them to get your partnerships, your coworkers thinking more about what's possible in the metaverse?
One thing that I think is interesting, I mean, I do agree with Jen about this idea of like people want to see the realism and people want to be able to, go walk through the, Notre Dame before it caught on fire. And I think that there's a place there. But I'm also interested in, how do we look at what is architecture currently and what does architecture mean within the metaverse? Right now we design buildings and projects, and we talked about not having the funds to design these really cool projects. Well, in the metaverse, there's no gravity, and there's no, there's constraints that we no longer have. And if we think of the metaverse potentially as another world we're building, well, then the architect is a builder. So how does the profession change? I even did some research, and we might start to see a virtual architect. Like, is there going to be a difference between a regular architect and then one that actually is commissioned to build in the metaverse? And so I think when I say, what do we take away to even our customers is, think about your place currently in the industry and where is that, what is it you do and what is it you would have to retool or rethink or reinvent in a virtual environment where there are no code requirements and everything is accessible, and we don't have to have accessible in the sense of stairs, not internet, but those are the things I'm actually really curious about is how does it change our definition of architect?
Yeah, that's expansive. There's certainly a lot of architects out there already. All those people who are building in Decentraland and the Sandbox, aren't those folks architects? Yeah. I mean, they're digital programmers. The people at Unreal Engine and all those other 3D gaming companies, multi-billion-dollar behemoths that they are. The other thing I like to think about too with existing physical architecture and the way AR might evolve to use that is, you might start building with the idea that people will see both your physical piece, but they'll also see it adapted for AR. So I could imagine walking through both interior spaces and exterior buildings and be able to see two separate things that may be conjoined when I'm looking at it through VR. Maybe there are two buildings across the street and across the top, there's some kind of, VR or AR overlay that creates a third element, if you will, of that architecture. So there are definitely lots of things to explore on there.
And it creates multiple revenue streams, like additional revenue streams that maybe we didn't think about. Even if we look at the technology that supports the metaverse, I mean, there are opportunities that impact investments and even for architects, thinking about investing in the projects we do. So I know when you pose that question about, do we design buildings differently? I don't even know if it'll necessarily be differently. It's going to be just additions too. And how do we create, as an architect, a lot of us are designing experiences and spaces. And so now we need to think about it in a virtual sense, and it really expands what those senses can be for individuals.
I legitimately believe, Christopher, we're going to get to a point where architecture firms, design firms, both landscaping, interior, all the different types of design. I think in the end, you're going to hand over a package of your digital files, and you're going to also include a Unity file or a Unreal file of your worlds, because that's, that's basically what we're doing. We're taking architectural and design plans from architects and interior designers. They're making small modifications and we're importing and building them in VR for companies and organizations who want their virtual headquarters to look like enhanced versions of what they have already. So
I think so. And it goes to the challenges we talked about. It's the challenges that we've seen. When I went to school 10 years ago, integrated project delivery was this big buzzword, and it still never really caught on. And we run into this issue of insurance and code requirements and building code officials. And there's a whole part of sort of the red tape aspect of the industry that we have to find ways to help nurture them and bring them along so that we can just hand over a Unity model and move forward.
That's interesting. Ian's got a good question here. We'll answer in just a minute, but I'm going to throw one more in before we get to Ian's question. And that is, again, Jen, I think you mentioned it before, taking people on a journey, right? Feeding them those flowers. Jason talked about making the bridge from what we need to what's possible. How do we convince our clients of the ROI to make that leap to, okay, we've done it this way, but what language do we use? What capabilities do we show them to show them this is something that they should spend their money on? I'll throw that up to the group. Who wants to answer that? Nobody.
I'll take a stab at it. First of all, sorry
Okay.
for the my kids were supposed to be out for longer, and then with my parents, and suddenly my kid wanders in with a new dinosaur. So
this is life. Absolutely, Jason.
I had to change locations. Yeah,
no, it's a great happenstance. I love to see. This is how we live our lives.
This is how we live our lives. Are there children wandering around in the metaverse interrupting meetings? I'm sure there will be. Then it will be indistinguishable from the real world. To Ian's question. Well, first, I just wanted to add a thought that I was thinking as I was listening to the discussion about architecture, which is that I wonder, as digital versions of real world find more use. I think one of the things that we may see, it's an interesting conversation about how like architecture, the architecture industry will adapt to it. But I think it's also worth thinking about how the entertainment industry was already radically changed by things like YouTube and TikTok, which is to say that the traditional background of someone who is a creator suddenly changes, and you don't need the kind of deep background in Hollywood production to suddenly create the kinds of things that millions and millions of people are going to love. And instead, sometimes it's somebody who comes out of nowhere with absolutely no training whatsoever who develops stuff that people love. So there's an interesting democratization that could happen here in all sorts of ways, and that'll be really exciting. So I think that once we see more of that, the idea of somebody with a kind of deep architecture education being the only person who could create this kind of stuff is going to seem antiquated. But to your question, Andy, about how we convince clients to engage with this, I mean, I think that it has to start with helping client, however we do this, with helping clients develop a culture of experimentation inside, right? This is not a one-off thing that they're going to be very ROI focused and not interested in experimentation, and then suddenly say, oh, okay, but why don't we throw a whole bunch of money at like some metaverse project? That's not what it's going to be. But I do think that the more that anybody who works with clients can offer a way not just to think about the value of an individual project, but rather also about how to foster a culture of experimentation in the first place. That's, I think, where you're going to start to see people warming up to these kinds of ideas. One of my favorite little pieces of business writing came from a writer at Harvard Business Review who wrote this very brief piece about why big companies stop innovating. And the answer that is proposed is because a company comes up with something new in the marketplace. It works really well. They have a lot of success out of it. And then over time, they start to shift more and more and more of their resources and their structure over towards efficiency, which is to say, how can we do the thing that we're already doing faster, better, cheaper? That is our method of innovation. And as they do that, they stop incentivizing actual new ideas and innovation. And that's how you get to a place like Blockbuster, where they weren't idiots over there. They totally totally saw it coming, but they just weren't structured to actually adapt to it because it was nobody's incentive to actually start to bring new ideas in. That's the problem that you have. And so I think we need to prepare clients for a world in which big new ideas are going to become part, not tomorrow, but eventually a big part of the future of this company. So you're going to need to build into your like org chart innovation, people who are incentivized to bring in new ideas, and then not in some weird silo where they're just like the innovation department that nobody cares about, but where they can actually report directly to the top and start to integrate that stuff in. That's the only way in which it's going to work.
I'm a big fan. There's a book series called The Strategizer, and I mention it so much I should probably reach out and get some royalties. But there's one part of it talks about being an invincible company, and it hits right on what you're talking about, Jason. Is this idea of how do we explore the future and then exploit the present? So how do we get really good at our present business models? And then how do we continue to explore future business models? And it highlights all these companies that have gotten really good at being invincible companies. And so, I mean, I think when we say like, how do we get people to buy into the metaverse? I think you take a step back and say, how do we keep people innovating? How do we keep thinking about continuous improvement and looking forward to what's next? Because I do think the metaverse is like exploded as a term currently, but everything goes through a hype cycle. And so I think managing expectations is going to be important because somebody's going to get buy-in and it's gonna crater for a bit. And everybody's gonna be left wondering like, what the heck was that all about? But then we're gonna get towards where we start, that slope of enlightenment and we actually figure out what we want to use it for. So I think managing expectations is important. And then just as a firm, good business is how do we sort of continuously improve?
Yeah, Second Life was started, 12 years ago? And it quite hasn't lived up to the hype. So Nima, I'm going to throw that question from Ian into your court. If you would help Ian and the rest of us understand when, if ever, will the metaverse ever become so sophisticated that it might even become indistinguishable between reality, what is reality, what we know reality is today, and what reality in the metaverse might be?
Well, I hope it never does, but, I really don't think that's such a great thing. But again, to the metaverse that I'm interested in, and I'll leave it to others to answer that question. Actually, is the world enhanced with further information, and it's something that doesn't totally necessarily makes you escape from it, but rather enhance it. So. I mean, there's degrees to that, and yes, I could check out when need be. But to me, it's where the digital and real kind of intertwine. We do that, but we do that through these screens, and I have to move on and come back. But then, if I have it as part of my life, that's what I'm looking forward to. But
yeah,
I know it doesn't answer your question, but
a little bit. The example that comes to mind when I was thinking about this before was if you've seen Back to the Future 2, and Marty McFly's on his hoverboard and he's in the middle of the square, and all of a sudden behind him, Jaws Part 18 or something like that comes up from behind him, and no hardware required, just ultimate 3D mixed reality in real life. So flashback there to a Back to the Future reference.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the sentiment between several of us here in the chat is that does not sound like a good world. We have seen the Matrix. I do not want to live in the Matrix. I want to be able to go out and fly fish and be on my boat and water ski or do whatever in a real world. And I want those to feel real. I don't want to necessarily have those same identical opportunities in my living room. Doesn't sound like the right world to me.
And for those of you, any of you who are LinkedIn people, you'll check out that my LinkedIn's not up to date and I'm completely in stealth mode with Morpheus XR. But what you will see is that I have lived a career of purpose orientation in terms of social and environmental impact. And I bring that up in this moment because I believe we are all stewards. And I think stewardship is something that we are granted with our intellect and with our capabilities. And those of us that happen to be here getting to shape the first metaverses, I believe it's our responsibility to embed and bake and center humanity and the best of humanity in what we're building. And I know that before I entered and left, very successful sustainability and change management career in entertainment to build in the foray of metaverse, I needed to be what is it? Philosophically, that's what I want, and spiritually aligned with my co-founders that we, in fact, we're going to build a tool that enhances the human experience and enhances human connection. And the thing is, I do believe, to Ian, who will watch this later, look, there are people today, and this is a real issue, who cannot distinguish certain forms of reality from the other. That's a real issue that we are contending with society. People are choosing escapism either consciously or through mental health. And there are people who struggle to identify and ground in a form of reality they can share with others. So that's going to be something to contend with. There will people who will want to use VR and metaverses to escape, to create realities that represent worlds that would not, I think, uphold to what we're sharing on this call. And I think it's our stewardship to create a place where there's meaningful dialogue. And I think about this when we think about games and violence, right? Like, what's the one that I was down at the Santa Monica Pier the other day, and people were like, oh, I see this on there's a shoot up one that everyone knows. I'm so sorry. Grand Theft Auto. They're like, I've seen this on Grand Theft Auto. It's just like Grand Theft Auto. And I was like, wow, to think their only experience at the Santa Monica Pier was probably mugging someone or running them over. Like
running from the cops.
Yeah, exactly. Or whatever happens in that game. And I thought to myself, okay, great. So that's okay. That exists. That is an expression of this art form. Right. And it's my responsibility to stir up and activate as much expressions of this art form that are alternatives to that and are used to help people connect or further their business or solve problems. And I love, Nima, what you guys are doing, because you give people a chance to integrate things into their daily life, to view and experience and kind of expose and kind of reflect and create. I think anytime we can direct the metaverse to be realistic enough to be indistinguishably valuable, but not necessarily, but still make it a conscious choice and empower people to choose. So they're co-creating with us. So I know I just said lots of metaphysical stuff, but
Jen,
I think that's where we need to be with it.
Yeah, Jen, that's a great way to kind of bring us back around. We are almost out of time. It's been a very quick 60 minutes, like I said, but thank you for kind of wrapping it up with that. I love that philosophical idea that we do have some responsibility to determine where we go with this. We all do. And I love that about our culture today. For the most part, I've got a few decades under my belt, and I have noticed in the last probably 10 to 15 years, more purpose-driven businesses out there, and each of us individually driving to have that kind of philosophical experience, so that we're not just out making money, but we're doing the things that we think are important for us culturally and socially. So thank you for bringing that around. One of the things that Carabiner and Applied Solutions have done for us is promised Jason that we were going to help distribute some of his books. So I want to close just now by letting everybody know, I think we've got a book for everybody who's registered. So if you've registered in today's webinar here, we're gonna I don't know how it is. I think Jason's still writing each and every book. But once that gets finished, I think when is it due out?
It's out September 6th. It is finished
so
now. This is not like monk scribes from the Middle Ages where I'm handwriting. Yeah,
he's got 20 people in a dark room writing the books. So we're going to have those somehow, some way. We'll find a way to get everybody who's registered for today's webinar one of those books. I look forward to reading it. It should be really interesting. I've been a big fan of Jason's podcast for a little while now, and his newsletters that come out. So great having you, Jason. Christopher, thank you so much for your time and your expertise in the AEC industry. Jen, I love what you did to wrap up there. And Nima, what Next Tech AR is doing to help democratize and help expand this role of AR, VR in our world has been fantastic. Love working with all of you guys, and I hope we can continue to do new, exciting stuff in the future. Manav, I'll hand it back to you if you have anything to close with.
No, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you all the panelists. Thank you, Andy, for coordinating this. This was great. I really enjoyed listening in. I know Ian was listening in on his phone while his plane was taking off. So he was super excited as well. So, and hopefully all the attendees, enjoyed as well. And then I think Suzanne mentioned that she'll be reaching out to get everyone's shipping addresses so we can get those books to everyone. So once again, just thank you everyone for joining today, and thank you.
Of course, we are all on social somewhere, right? Find us all on Instagram, LinkedIn, Find podcasts, the AEC Disruptors, and Build for Tomorrow from Jason. Find Next Tech AR and Jen's Morpheus XR and some other business that's still under wraps, right? What may be coming down the pike soon. So thanks everyone. We'll wrap it with that.
Thanks,
I appreciate it. Enjoy your weekend coming up, and look forward to connecting with everybody again online soon. Cheers.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.